track record of publication management, which is the top publication aiming at 3-star LBS very soon, will be shifting this community to a new kind of knowledge, because serendipity and knowledge, there may be things that an entrepreneurial pathway, also because you are dealing with the GIFRI, the traditional global and entrepreneurial finance research center. They will be presenting some results of your last publication. So will not be used too many words and describing your track record of publication on innovation, R&D management, and the other. But I would like to leave your speech because I think that this community on systemic approach would truly find out interesting space about your SKARSE project. Okay.
Thank you. I want to thank the organizers of the conference and, of course, Manlio for facilitating, inviting me here, and all of you being here. Appreciate it. If you would, turn the lights off, please. And I certainly am not here to talk to you, some expert on systems. I'm more of have been a student of systems and cybernetics. I found it quite exciting, intriguing, and inspiring over the years. I am an engineer by primary training, and then went into technology management and innovation studies. I participated in an informal discussion on Wednesday, which was fascinating with several of you. And the discussion, among other things, touched on whether, how, and why the field of systems and cybernetics is as relevant as it could or should be. In fact, the colleague was much more blunt. He claimed that we are sort of irrelevant. We had a discussion about that. I think the relevance sometimes has a degree of profundity and diffusion that actually becomes transparent, as you can think of Kuhn's structure of scientific revolutions concept. But in addition, we talked about the extent to which engineers could be better policymakers than economists. And this relates partly to what I'll discuss today, the top-down versus bottom-up issues, approaches, and a combination of those which others have touched on already. So, the idea is that you start with something more humbly, you empirically, experimentally prove it, and then you build up rather than conceptualize the world in abstract models and expect it to behave as you feel or think it should behave. I have been in the United States for more than 30 years now, more than half my life, but my early years were in Greece. And this is one real life case example of where and how the dismal science, along with eager politicians, may have had dismal results for real people over many years now. This is something we're all experiencing, in fact. So partly the discussion will be about the future of developed democracies and the future of Europe from a systems perspective, okay? I will focus, having this general macro context, we'll try to focus very specifically on a micro set of issues, and that is the study of ecosystems, not biological, but the analogy as it relates to innovation and entrepreneurship, which is the focus of my research and that of my team for some time. And this is where the concept of SKARSE, this is the English word SKARSE, but written with a K, not a C. And this is an acronym for Strategic Knowledge, Arbitrage, and Serendipity. This is something we have been developing and validating empirically, and I think it's one way at least that you can understand, model and quantify the value added of networks, thinking of ecosystems as networks, and determine whether, how, and when a network reaches a critical level of maturity to be both sustainable as well as resilient and then high performing. We have examples known like Silicon Valley or other places, but this very approach actually also reveals how and why the presence and existence of such networks is not easy to replicate and transplant. In fact, what we're finding is a rather challenging and embarrassing even issue for policymakers, economists, and politicians who feel that they can simply invest or throw money at the creation of centers of excellence, networks of excellence, clusters. And indeed, what we have found is that there is a nonlinear relationship that reveals the self-organizing and adaptive nature of the network, meaning that until and unless the network or the ecosystem matures enough, you actually have a waste of resources. In fact, throwing more money at it may actually end up crowding out innovation, crowding out or preventing the further maturation of the network organically in a sustainable, again, and resilient manner. And that actually, unfortunately, may indeed remind of many policies and actions, whether it is at the European Union level or other such things. Now, does that mean that the government or the public sector doesn't have a role to play? Quite the opposite. Along with the SKARSE concept, what I'll talk about today is the models of the quadruple and quintuple innovation helix. They build and expand the triple helix, but they differentiate in a very important, in my mind, in our opinion, way. They emphasize the role and the importance of civil society, which is the fourth dimension, and the environment within which everything takes place. And we take this approach to identify proxies, variables, and metrics that come out of all these five, or relate to all these five categories or pillars: government, university, industry, civil society, and environment, to, again, represent, model, quantify the value added of ecosystems and try to then predict and control whether, how, and why, and when you can actually better plan and anticipate and engage, whether you are an individual entrepreneur, a policymaker, or an industry practitioner. And again, the important difference, triple helix approaches often, this is not the intent of course, but they often justify and ennoble autocratic top-down approaches. They say policies, government, university, industry policies, top-down is what really matters, defines, determines the development and prosperity and all that. We say, no, you need, along with that, a bottom-up balancing and complementing of these policies with civil society initiatives and activities. And of course, all of these four sectors need to be aware of the environment around them. So triple bottom line, sustainability and resilience. This is the big picture. I could actually stop now, but now I'll go into the slides if you want. Should I continue? I don't know. Maybe we should vote. Democracy is a good thing, right? Okay. If I can relate probably to our discussion, one last comment. You were mentioning to us in this discussion about your experience in Chile in the early 70s, right? And that reminded me, because this is one of the dates that I do remember, that Chile had its own September 11. September 11, 1973. So, I will not go more into that, but it's interesting to look at the different punctuation points in history. Okay, so the theme is about how can we better understand, and that also, by the way, is motivated and relates to my involvement with the Journal of Knowledge Management. I certainly intend to develop and position this platform of publishing scholarly work with an increasing emphasis on a systems perspective and systems use and approaches, as long as we don't become too formalistic and too hostages of our own concepts and formalism. So this is knowledge for development, Vision 2030, and the concept of smart growth. That again has been around in European white papers and so forth, smart, sustainable, inclusive growth. This is the mantra and the challenge. And we talk about theory, policy, practice. In our work, we try to be as scholarly as possible, of course, but at the same time remain as relevant as possible. So our focus is on theory, policy, practice, and politics, actually. Because you can't ignore the human condition and the reaction and behavior of citizens. You shouldn't, actually. And to close the discussion, the comment I made earlier about economics versus engineering, my response to, again, the colleague that said, we're irrelevant and the economists have all the power and make reality, I said, this is an issue of the reality of perception as well as the perception of reality. And as we know well, and from recent developments, the perception of reality establishes the reality of perception and shapes reality going forward, whether it's elections or otherwise. So the point is, we talked about how the importance of connecting the people is shown in the emergence of behavioral economics. In my mind, behavioral economics is a symptom of the recognition, implicitly of course, by economists, of the importance of a more data-driven engineering, if you wish, analytical approach. Okay? So let me continue with this. Very briefly, these are some of the projects at macro, meso, and macro levels we haven't further discussed that we're involved in, and we have related publications in that I have already mentioned to you, but one just example from the top, multi-objective mathematical programming. We look at competitiveness, productivity, and innovation trends. We have found very interesting things at the national level across European countries, countries that are considered champions, pioneers, best performers are not necessarily so, depending on how you frame the questions. Okay, and in the end, and going back to the ecosystems, the objective is to figure out ways to better design ecosystems that are both effective and efficient, both. So this is about efficacy. I'll go, and all of these have dynamic, evolutionary dynamics, or some other concept of system and cybernetics in them. This is quickly, again, a list of projects that I'm involved with. Several of those I have created along with colleagues, of course. This is multiple team efforts, book series, journals, encyclopedias, and of course, the Journal of Knowledge Management. Now, 100 years ago, actually, an American president engaged the US in the First World War with a vision to make the world safe for democracy. Nowadays, we have, along with that, I think, a concern that relates to or can be captured making democracy safe for the world, and of course that doesn't impugn or indict democracy, quite the opposite. It's how we perceive, represent, and leverage concepts that relate, presumably, to democratic representations and plebiscites. This is a very tricky issue. It needs to engage all of us as citizens and as individuals, and I think all of us here have both a responsibility and a role, given our perspectives and our knowledge and understanding of things, more systemic view. Because democracy, ironically, by its nature, is hostile to the very near term, short-termism. Politicians are focused on the next elections, while they're presumably expected to be making policies for the medium to long term. And that's the challenge regarding autocracies, that they have the luxury to plan in the long run. Of course, they have other limitations, some of which are related here. The knowledge flow, absorption, sharing openly, that remains a huge advantage for the democratic camp, let's say. So the knowledge for development concept, where are we here? I thought, yes, I guess it doesn't show the colors. All right, sorry about that. The knowledge for development concept has three elements in it: smart cities, global local networks of real and virtual incubators, and the concept of SKARSE, strategic knowledge, arbitrage, and serendipity that I mentioned. The smart cities, of course, this is a concept we all know about, and there's a lot of research and discussion. But the reality, the motivation, first of all, is that the majority of the population on the earth lives in cities. And these are very dense, very interconnected, very, again, profoundly architectured, designed, and structured ecosystems, the cities. And so it's a very, very interesting, petri dishes, if you wish, for our concepts. And the concept of global, local, real, and virtual networks of incubators in the cities to be considered that. Social media nowadays are an important enabler of this. This is a concept that was developed quite some time ago. More than 10 years ago, and I have a paper in Technovation about this global, local, real virtual incubator network. So this is from a book we did on smart development, focusing on e-development, came out in 2005, where we look at the general vision, how technology, hopefully, and policy and politics can move everybody from regimes of natural scarcity, where they exist, to artificial abundance. Of course, the reality and the practice often is that we move from regimes of either natural or artificial abundance to artificial scarcity. And if you think about it, this is about, again, a regulatory mechanism for establishing supply and demand and forming markets. And of course, you can have extremes, whether it's oligopolies, monopolies, or other such things in this context. Now, serendipity and arbitrage. Again, this is more technical definitions. Serendipity is really what happens if you are part of a network. This could be an example, real-time, in-person connecting, but also online, virtual. The point is that online you have very deep tunneling effects. You really are connected with those who are in the network, and you cannot truly easily, yet at least, maybe semantic technologies may enable this to go further, but at this point we have tunnel vision. We're connected and we discover and engage with those who were meant to connect and discover and engage based on how we have been profiled by the different search engines and the setup of whatever network we're part of, social network. The nice thing with people being physically in coexistence, and something I still recall from my days before, of course, 20, 30 years ago, I was in my university's library. I was looking for certain books. It often happened more than once that in looking for a certain book, I would actually come across another book completely unrelated or completely outside at first my field of search, that ended up being, in many cases, much more important, influential and instrumental. This is, in my mind, the issue of serendipity and the challenge and opportunity with search engines and the like to have deep semantic profiling of someone. And Amazon and others are trying to say, if you're interested in this, you might be interested in that, but these are early days still. So serendipity is about the happy accidents of discovery, connecting, engaging in a way with others in your network that may really complement, reinforce, add value uniquely to what you're doing, and also complete what you're missing. The capacity to, first of all, realize that this is not automatic or instant or guaranteed. Your experience, expertise, your cognitive frameworks for interpreting, which are also self-organizing, adapting, and evolving, determine whether and how you will understand that and how you will interpret it and how fast and well you will extract and capture the value that can be added. So this is the arbitrage effect. And these are things we have modeled and we've been looking at intelligent agent simulations of ecosystems as well as time series analytics to look at actual real data over time and how we can also interpret and model those in simulation to understand what happens there. And this is where this nonlinear relationship I mentioned earlier emerges from. I'll show that again. In connection with this is important in the real context, the context of practice and politics that I mentioned before, all of us. Social media and modalities like crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and this other thing of crowdstorming, which is more like brain focused. It's focused but diffuse brainstorming. Empower each one of us individually to identify initiatives, gain support for it, and also shape the initiatives rather democratically through the crowdsourcing, and then gain the funding and the resources very quickly and easily in some cases. Many small contributions to create the momentum and the capacity for an individual to be as strong as the actual real and virtual network that URC is part of. And this, now think of in the context of cities, where there is real and virtual networking and different kinds of clusterings and bundlings happening. And of course, now I talked about the quadruple, quintuple helix. I want to move on and show this in more specificity. This is, I'm sorry about the busyness and fuzziness of this, but I'll explain. This is basically a realization or a representation of an ecosystem that has multiple levels, it has multiple nodes, it has multiple stakeholders and aspects, and it is connected in a way that is self-referential or fractal. And the bundles that make up the building nodes of this, these small circles within the larger one, the larger ones. The larger ones are micro, meso, and macro level representations, or you can think of those as different sectors and so forth. The bundles within them, though, are agglomerations of people, culture, and technology attributes and artifacts and entities. People, culture, and technology, and I'll explain that more next here, which is that in defining how you can conceptualize and then monetize, whether it's for or not-for-profit, especially if it's a not-for-profit context, it's even more important, to be able to monetize the value added and capture that value, or whatever it is you're doing to add value. Okay, my work in both academic and applied practitioner contexts of entrepreneurship and innovation, the essence of a business plan. What is your value added, and what is your value proposition therefore, and what is your business model? How are you going to monetize your value added? So, business models, and there's a lot of interest and research which are also involved in this concept of business model innovation. We look at this again from a systemic point of view. We have sort of meta-level issues and dynamics. And this is going back all the way to my doctoral thesis almost 25 years ago, where I looked at 3 levels of learning and sort of migrated my learnings and my research from engineering and robotics at the time and intelligent controls into the study of organizations. So I looked at learning to learn, and learning to learn how to learn. And of course, Arbitrage and Shen and others at the time had written about deaf-thorough learning and so forth. But I conceptualized that and tried to do a lot of ethnographic studies. I looked at nuclear power, transportation, pharmaceuticals, advanced materials, and so forth. I looked at companies from the US, France, Germany, and Canada. And I looked at nuclear power because there's 0 room for failure. I looked at the others because they were operating, at least the assumption was that they operate in very competitive environments where there's also very little, if not 0 room for error. So I juxtaposed and benchmarked the 2 kinds of companies. I'm talking about Airbus, Daimler, Saint-Gobain, a lot of nuclear power utilities from the US. Interesting things came out of this. In fact, the thesis and the book that came out is called The Strategic Management of Technological Learning. And in my mind, still, the essence of competitive, sustainable, resilient advantage is the capacity to engage in higher order learning better, faster, and longer also than others. So, to come back to this, robust, resilient, and remunerative business model innovation is where you really engage and learn from people, culture, and technology, top-down, bottom-up, in multiple ways, as I discussed, to really stay ahead of the curve. And actually, as we like to talk about, and this is part of another research project we're involved in, to anticipate disruption. So we look at the technology life cycle, and we have developed proxies, technology push and market pull, but also technology pull and market push. And we have metrics and proxies for those. And we will look at how these compare to anticipate where you may be on the curve, what the shape is, because the challenge is, it's like you're blindfolded trying to figure out what the animal you're touching is and what part of it you're touching. This is very hard. To the extent that one can open that black box, it has huge implications for R&D, strategic R&D management, and policies and practices for companies and everybody else. To have a better sense anyway, that you're closer to an inflection point and that the curve itself is not prolonged, it's going to go down steeply or vice versa. So, in capturing what I've been discussing in the context of what we call heterogeneity dynamics, the engagement of the core inputs to economic activity. Adam Smith, Schumpeter, and Drucker. They talked about land, labor, capital, technology, entrepreneurship, and then Drucker knowledge. This here shows the dynamics of competition. Basically what happens is you start with coexisting. I think I showed here these words that I didn't talk about. You have coexisting first, coexistence, and then you have competition, collaborating, competing for scarce resources. Okay, as a process of that, a result of that, you change, you co-evolve to figure out for a period of time at least what's the optimal configuration way to operate. And then, based on that, and as others I mentioned yesterday, Professor Pakevich and others, co-create and co-develop. So here, this is happening so that these inputs resources produce results, whether it's companies and whether they're more or less profitable and so forth. This relates to what I mentioned before about the understanding and designing of effective and efficient, robust and resilient ecosystems. Now, there are bigger dimensions, and if I'm reaching the time budget, give me an advance warning of a few minutes. There are broader issues here. How inventive, innovative, and entrepreneurial a country is certainly shapes and influences its national brand. There are small countries that, as we say, have a much bigger impact compared to larger countries, partly because of that. And of course, that has implications for prosperity as well as quality of life and so forth. And this is very important for Europe, that has a substantial residual of human and intellectual capital that it is not fully and properly using. And indeed, if I may say, what is happening with everybody from around Europe trying to get into Germany, for instance, is not a good thing, neither for Europe nor for Germany in the long run. It may appear to be good for Germany in the short term, but it will create disruptions in my mind that are not good. You need a more balance. This is a system out of balance. And those who really have a sense and an understanding of system dynamics could actually develop an interesting map here that shows what the likely pathways to be followed are. And then you have politicians that have no real clue, somehow appearing prophetic, of course. I mean, it's our fault and responsibility that we make them appear to be right. Anyway, this is a different context here. So the challenge, and in a constructive way, an opportunity for smart growth is, and as I mentioned this before with the I'll show you a lot of Venn diagrams in this sense. The idea here is to understand that whether it's a country or a corporation or an organization of any kind or an ecosystem, it has interactions. It's in some ways open. Apropos, let me just mention this too, because we also engage in this as it relates. There's a lot of, along with the lean approach, there's also the open innovation concept. We respectfully differ. My research team and I, we have been looking at what we call targeted open innovation, and that has been around since the beginning of time. In fact, nobody's really truly fully open. You're open conditionally. You have specific filters, knowledge filters, and other conditions. Otherwise, you couldn't even have a system operating without conditions, constraints, initial conditions, and moderating factors. So it is targeted to align your business technology strategy. And the reason I mention all that is because diplomacy, whether it's science, cultural, or innovation diplomacy, which is what we have developed to complement the other two, are again exactly aiming to serve this objective, to figure out better ways to engage in targeted open innovation and engage in adding value. So the idea is, how can you leverage your scientific, cultural, but also innovation competences? What is it, 5 minutes, okay. In this context also, and I'm sorry there's an echo here, there's a self-reinforcing feedback for some reason, I don't know if you can control for that, for Europe, which is what I call the displaced people. Now this is not just the refugees, by the way. We increasingly have, with these rates of unemployment that we have in Europe, most of it anyway, we increasingly have displaced people that are becoming disconnected. They are effectively operating as externalities. That was a wonderful non-systemic solution. You just turned it off. You get the Nobel Prize for... Let me continue. Please don't take my time. My time doesn't count now, please.
I know, but just let me do the last.
Are you going to hit me with this one? No. If it doesn't work, please don't bring the bigger one. This is on? Okay, so anyway. Thank you. So, the digital transformation in the context of what we're discussing. ICT, information and communication technologies, enabling the social networking and all the other things, the crowdsourcing funding, looked into or combined with the quadruple quintuple concept and aiming to figure out ways to, for instance, support and promote training and entrepreneurial creation where you engage, and this is something that is a proposal that we've been pushing in different levels at different contexts. Engaging all the sectors that I mentioned, government, university, industry, and civil society to support the formation of entrepreneurial ventures, hopefully robust, resilient, and remunerative, that would involve both refugees and other displaced people. There's a big problem in many societies, understandably, and it's amazing how some of those that are more challenged are also more tolerant. It's also amazing and sad in a way that other societies with the potential or the threat to be impacted have started erecting walls and doing all kinds of other things, as we know in Europe. Okay? We have countries like Greece and Italy that have been receiving a lot of refugees and have been trying to accommodate them. With countries further north, we have been erecting borders. And we have Germany that at some point at least really tried to be generous and accommodating, but this is not enough. It's not sustainable to do so. What if we created a process at the European level, of course, that it has both the scale and the impact to engage refugees and unemployed people in a way that will train, engage, and activate them, inspire them, incentivize them to add value themselves rather than being a burden. Okay? We have anecdotal cases. Again, the systemic approach. I would like and hope to see an initiative at the European level. This is a way to reclaim a say on the future of Europe rather than waiting passively for it to be visited upon it by external influences. Same context, the cyber aspect, and this is also related to a project we're involved in. We talk about cybersecurity. I consider cybersecurity, I call it, to be extreme and make a point, I call it an illusion. For a period of time, you can succeed in keeping the thieves outside the house. They really want to get in. And I'm not going into the technical aspects too much, but the point is dealing with the causes, not the symptoms. Cybersecurity is a symptom in many ways. We also need to deal with the causes which have to do with development, democracy, and of course defense. So this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the combination of these cyber, defense, development, democracy in the broader context, and trying to develop and identify better policies and practices. Now, we had a discussion, a presentation by Francesco and others that I'm happy to be part of yesterday on wise data versus big data and smart data, right? So we're the wise guys, I guess. So this is related to a presentation made in Paris for the United Nations a couple of years ago on what we call knowledge, information, and data analytics, kid analytics, not childish. Kid analytics for sustainable enterprise excellence, which relates to how you become more resilient and robust and so forth. This is about semantics and what we call the nuanced context issue, which is really understanding and deriving meaning from the things you're looking at. This also can be thought of in the context of cities, smart cities in particular, and different aspects that go into it. And again, this does actually lend itself and is the beginning of what you can develop as intelligent agents, simulations, and so forth. Let me jump ahead to show you this and close with this. A couple of things. The way that the knowledge, we've been talking about knowledge for development from the beginning, along with the quadruple, quintuple helix concepts, we have built and operationalized those on, again, another advancement. Novotny and Gibbon and others have written about the Mode 1 and Mode 2 knowledge production systems concepts, which are really related to linear and first-degree nonlinear innovation models. We, again, based on the triple-level learning that I mentioned earlier, we have introduced the Mode 3 knowledge production systems, which is an approach that focuses very explicitly and puts a lot of emphasis on the higher order learning, combining 3 levels at all times. And this is really aiming to show learning and evolution, and this phenomenon of co-petition, co-evolution, co-specialization in all its entire spectrum of activities and applications. And this relates to and incorporates concepts like the academic firm and the entrepreneurial university, and how you can basically, focusing on the knowledge interfaces across the different pillars of the quadruple innovation helix model, you can optimize the designs. Okay, and this requires more time to go into. But this is really the gist of that part. Let me continue and show you here the quintuple helix concept in more specificity, government, university, industry, civil society, environment, to the extent that these interfaces, and this is again a simplification, but is meant to be hopefully an explicit, clear representation of how these engage. We have a methodology, co-creation workshops, funding and pooling of resources, qualitative research, experiments and pilots, quantitative research, commercialization and scaling. This is actually an existing methodology for implementing the quadruple quintuple innovation helix model, the Q2IH. And I'm closing with some findings from this simulation that I mentioned. This is what we found, and what that shows is that until and unless you get to this level, this inflection point here, at the bottom, which presumably is a threshold of maturation of the ecosystem or knowledge network, you actually have people leaving the network. The entrepreneurs intuitively know where and when to engage in this. So let me go back to go also here. And this, so what we have found is that knowledge serendipity and knowledge arbitrage can effectively and reliably represent the conditions, both initial conditions and moderating factors, that actually determine whether, when, and how you can facilitate the maturation of an ecosystem and produce results. Fine della presentazione. Mille grazie.